Welcome to Wild Turkey Science, a podcast made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow. I'm Dr. Marcus Lashley, Professor of Wildlife Ecology at the University of Florida.
And I'm Dr. Will Goolsby, Professor of Wildlife Ecology and Management at Auburn University. We're both lifelong hunters and devoted scientists who are passionate about hunting, managing, and researching wild turkeys.
In this podcast, we'll explore turkey research, speak to the experts in the field, and address the difficult questions related to wild turkey ecology and management.
Our goal
is to serve as your connection to wild turkey science.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
Is this recorded?
We really couldn't get through a few seconds of silence for Charlotte to be able to capture the background noise. I mean, like, are we five?
I don't know.
I mean, sometimes we act that way.
She needed just a few seconds of quiet.
Well, it's because Corey has such a huge model apparently running on his computer that the fan is like beating down on the microphone.
What was that you were saying earlier? You can hear the science coming across the airwaves.
Yeah, you can hear the science right now. Impressive. Yeah, well, Corey, we appreciate you coming to do this. Obviously, we are scientists, but not very many people sort of recognize us that way. We are more known as just a couple of guys that are trying to do science and communicate that to people, and we're having fun with it. So Dr. Corey Callahan is one of our faculty here, Will. I think you've already put that together, but I've known Corey for a while. How long have you been at the University of Florida?
Almost 2.5 years.
Okay, so
Yep.
I knew it had been a couple of years. And not a turkey guy, but you're a bird guy.
Bird
and
guy.
You and I have been collaborating some on some of your specialty areas to do some turkey related work, but it's not normally part of your overall focus and research program.
No, yeah, I rarely focus on single species at a time. Most of what I do is at a more community level, thinking about many different species kind of all at once. And so the collaborations with you are definitely eye-opening and different and pushes me in different directions.
Yeah, I was checking out your Google Scholar page just a little while ago, Corey, and I saw that you had one paper in particular that I think had several thousand species included in it.
Yeah,
Is that right?
we tried to estimate the abundance for 9,700 species of birds, like the global population abundance.
Why couldn't you just make it an even 10K?
Yeah, but there's not quite enough.
There's only 9,700 species of birds.
We need more splitters in this field. There's too many lumpers.
More splitters. There's like between 10,300 and 11,000 something, depending on the taxonomy you follow. But
I learned that today.
The data wasn't enough to get all 10,000.
So there really is just over 10,000 species of birds.
Yeah.
See, nailed it.
Yeah,
Right
so we
off
did
the
pretty
cuff.
well. That's why almost all the world's bird species too.
So, just out of curiosity, are the other ones just too data poor to?
Yeah, pretty much.
include?
Yeah, there's just not enough data. And so a lot of them are quite rare, or have like one record, or like super rare species that live on one mountaintop in Indonesia or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you're talking about those species not having adequate data to analyze. So can you talk a little bit about, we're here to talk about citizen science today. So what are some of the data sources you use for that?
Yeah, so in the world of citizen science, I think there's a few, big data sets that are out there. eBird is going to be the most obvious one related to birds. And then iNaturalist is the second one that is across all taxa. Are you guys familiar with both of those? Or?
Mm-hmm.
Only in name.
Only in name. Okay.
I mean, I have slightly more experience than that, but I think a lot of people have probably heard of those and never used it or seen anything that comes from it. So you can start there.
Yeah, I can give a quick overview. So eBird is ran by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology out of Ithaca, New York. It is a very successful citizen science program, and it does what they collect data in the form of lists. So basically, I'm a big birder, so I go out birding, whether it's a hike or just sitting out. During lunch, I'll do a little eBird checklist, just sitting out at my office. Every bird you see, you mark down the species, and then you count the number of individuals of that species, and then that turns into this like eBird checklist that can be 3 species long or 40 species long. It depends. So all that data then goes up into the cloud, and eBird collects that data, and then that's downloadable in what I use.
Okay, so like it's open source for scientists to access it.
Yep. And
that's cool.
And there's about, I think, 1.7 million records of wild turkey in the eBird dataset.
1.7 million.
I think so.
Yeah, that's a lot.
1.87 million observations.
Yeah, that's really cool. So let me ask you, because I have never done this and I don't know how it works. It sounded like to me you're like writing it on a napkin or something. Is this electronic?
Yeah, no, you don't write it on a napkin. That'd be weird. Yeah.
I
don't know. I mean, you might, but I don't know other people that would. No, there is an app. There is an app for it, and it's just straight on the phone.
So when you keep your list, you're like writing that into the app that is automatically going in. Okay.
Yep.
So if you're on YouTube, Corey just showed his phone with the app on it, apparently.
But you have to be able to identify the birds first to enter them, right?
I can identify turkeys.
You should be able to identify them, yes.
Well, the reason I brought that up is because if this is something that I think some of our listeners would be interested in, I pair it with the Merlin Bird ID app, and you can actually turn that app on to where it's actively listening, and it has an algorithm that will identify birds by song for you. And it's pretty good. And what I'll do is, if I'm sitting around, having a slow morning in the turkey woods or something like that, it's a perfect time to put that app on, and you can start learning all the other different species of birds that are calling, and potentially even enter that data into eBird, so people like Corey can use it to advance conservation. It's kind of a pretty cool process. And I feel like it's lowered the barrier to entry to learning birds.
Yeah,
too.
Well, that's one thing, like with Merlin, that did. It made, not that I want to be a big birder, but I do enjoy knowing what's around me, and particularly when I'm thinking about habitat quality and things that are responding to different habitat treatments and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I've started making note of what I'm hearing singing in it. And I wouldn't have, it would have been a big learning curve for me to do that, because it's been a long time since I learned all the bird calls. And I don't remember them now.
Yeah.
I remember I knew it at one time, but I can't necessarily identify the species for a lot of them.
Right.
And it did open the door for me to get back into that without having to go through an ornithology class or do a bunch of homework to try to figure it out again. But so Corey, I'm coming at this completely naive. I know that you already know that, but
he's grinning because that's such a surprise to him.
Yeah,
I'm just trying to make that clear to everybody that I'm acknowledging my insufficiency here and I'm owning it. It seems like this would be relatively easy for about 3 million turkey hunters. That's about how many turkey hunters we have. To download this app and just punch in during the spring season when you see some turkeys.
Yeah.
Would that not just create an awesome data set on turkeys?
So it would be relatively easy. There's different levels of what we call data structure in eBird. So let's say you're a turkey hunter and you can only identify turkeys. Then you can submit an observation of just a turkey. The problem with that, and that's good, right? We know where that turkey is. But the kind of converse is that we don't know about all the other species and what's not there, right? And so if I go out and I do a checklist, whether I'm hiking or driving, whatever, if I don't submit turkeys, that's actually just as valuable as knowing when I submit turkeys. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. So you're saying the absence.
Yes and no.
The absence data is as important as the presence data.
The absence data is also very important to get those kind of like ecological trends from. Yes.
Right.
Yeah. So I think that I'm hearing what you're saying. The way you said it, I didn't pick up immediately, but after Will responded, I think I'm there. So you're saying if you're doing a checklist, you're essentially trying to capture everything that you detect.
Yep.
And the fact that you don't include turkey in that is important data to know things about turkeys.
That's exactly right. Yep.
So, but I guess my point is, or I guess,
but your point about you say 3 million, is that?
Yeah, like if everybody was just, they could just like keep up with every hunt. And sometimes they don't see turkeys.
Yeah.
So you'd still get that data too. Like they could put in there, I didn't see any turkeys.
But
got
maybe
a hooded
you saw
warbler in a cardinal, but I didn't get a turkey.
And maybe you had Bob White, but no turkey.
Yeah, I think what Corey's saying is that if you're only entering turkeys and you're in a spot that has no turkeys, but you don't enter any other bird species, he doesn't know that you were recording data there, but you didn't detect a turkey.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, okay. That's right.
Gotcha.
So we need the 3 million hunters to just put in no turkeys if they don't see any, and then count how many they saw. I was just thinking this does seem like a really good, easy way for folks to get involved and get data that you and I are already working on personally.
Yeah, and I mean
to utilize for turkeys.
And even further than that, like one of the main reasons that gets me excited about that is that these 3 million people in hunters, y'all are going on land that most people don't go on, right. Or hiking in further, or using ATVs to get 6 miles in instead of the 1 mile in that your average person's going to go. Mm-hmm. So that data actually becomes even more valuable because the spatial on a map, the spatial amount of points that you're kind of like surveying is actually a lot more than just a random subset of the population.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Great point. Yeah, no, I think a lot of our listeners are on private land that you
private
wouldn't
land
have access
exactly.
To.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then also they're sitting in the woods sometimes for an hour or 2 hours at a time, just being completely still and quiet. So
trying to be unknown. There's a lot of value. Not being associated with the trail.
Right.
That some of the things that might be common of other folks that are using it wouldn't be absent on purpose for turkey hunters. Yeah, that's an interesting idea.
So if there's hunters out there that still aren't convinced of the value of participating in something like this, what would be, let's just say all 3 million decided to participate this year, hypothetically, what are some of the things that you can do with the data? Or maybe a better way to ask that, or what are some of the analyses that you've done related to birds that our listeners might be interested in using that type of data?
And I could even add on, you could just talk about what are you actually doing with turkeys with this data
even
currently.
Better, yeah.
Yeah, well, but let me answer Will's question first, because I think it's a little bit more bigger picture and start at a bigger picture, and then I can jump in a little bit more to what we're doing. But I mean, I think the value that you get from this is especially when you start thinking about every single year, people are going to the same sites, right? And so 1 year they do a checklist, or and they see 10 turkeys, and then the next year they see 8, and then 7, and then all of a sudden 0, 0, 0, 0, 0.
Yeah.
That's actually really important data, especially coupling that with what I just said about going to places where we rarely have data from.
Right.
Right? Like you're limited by thinking about just public hunt data, right? Like all these private lands, there's a lot of valuable data there.
Right.
So I guess that's bigger picture. And now, what was the question you asked, Marcus?
Well, I was just chiming in. I don't know how much Will is aware that you already are using this data set and a lot of other kinds of data like this to do work on turkeys. And I thought for our audience, and maybe we could just kind of cut through to that, like not explain to them how it might help, but how it is helping.
Yeah, no, that's fair. So one of the things that we're doing right now is trying to make maps of relative abundance and occupancy.
Yeah.
So occupancy is the probability that if you put a point on a map, the probability that there's going to be a turkey there, present or not, right?
Yeah.
From 0, because it's in the middle of a lake, to one because it's in the middle of pristine, well-managed, grassland, pine, flatwood kind of habitat, whatever it might be. So that we're using these data to make these insights, right? So we've gathered all the eBird data for the state of Florida, and we've run some of these statistical models to focus on occupancy. And then we've gone one step further to try to estimate relative abundance. Mm-hmm. And so at a spatial grain throughout the entire state, we have maps that are, we're working on right now that basically show the patterns of relative abundance, meaning, there's 10 turkeys here and 3 turkeys there. What we're interested in is like the relative difference between those two. So it's not necessarily we know how many turkeys are in this site, but we think that there's, about 5 times more turkeys here than there are 50 miles down the road. Right. And then what we're doing, like from a conservation perspective, we're actually trying to put that in the context of the Florida Wildlife Corridor. Do you all talk about that on your, listeners familiar with that about? Yeah, okay. To try to understand how this, massive landscape connectivity, habitat connectivity initiative that the state of Florida is pushing actually influences this relative abundance. So we're asking, are there more turkeys in the corridor than outside the corridor?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And are they more productive in the corridor than outside? And various other questions that go along with that. So I know you were restricting it to Florida for that data set, but you also were using iNaturalist to do that, right? Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. We can circle back kind of like, so that's the eBird train, which is like very good data because you can, as Will mentioned, you get these presence and absences. The other side of the coin is something called iNaturalist, which is for any taxonomic group. Like it's not just birds, any plant, animal, fungi, you name it. And there it's interesting because you don't actually need to like know what you're looking at. So, if you take a photo of something, upload it, then a community of naturalists actually come along and help identify that for you. Mm-hmm. And so we're using iNaturalist data to answer some of these same questions and look at relative abundance and correlating that with actually camera trap data at a national scale.
That's really cool. That's what I was going to ask next.
That's
is
range wide for turkeys.
Yeah. So could you start? I mean, it would be hard, I guess. You'd have to first find a place that was, had an adequate amount of both iNaturalist and eBird data, but hypothetically, you could start pairing those together, right? And maybe even seeing like if there's iNaturalist records of certain plants in certain areas, maybe you could start looking at some habitat associations there.
Absolutely. Yep. So you could do that even using just photos that are uploaded, right? So there's about 80,000 photos of turkeys uploaded to eBird.
Wow. Okay.
And then another 100,000 or so in iNaturalist, right? So there's actually a lot of information in the background of those photos, to try to get some, idea. Are they in a grassland or are they in some flat? Like, what is the habitat associations?
Pine forest, hardwood forest, so on
exactly.
and so forth.
And more times than not, a lot of people, when they upload photos of turkeys, it's not always like full frame turkey. It's turkey with a bunch of background, kind of zoomed out. And so I think there's a lot there.
Yeah, and that was one of the other points that I did want to make to our listeners real briefly is going back to what you touched on as far as having the relative abundance of turkeys across a relatively large spatial scale. That unlocks the door to us asking all sorts of questions. It just the variables that we could correlate with that abundance are only limited to what data that we have available on those other, inputs that we might be interested in. So like we could use satellite imagery, for instance, to quantify the land cover in an area that has, more turkeys versus fewer turkeys. And then you could go right on down the list looking at things like, development, for instance, or the role of agriculture. There's, the questions are basically only limited to the data that's available in your own creativity.
We find, unsurprisingly, but we find a quite negative relationship between agriculture and turkey abundance and occupancy.
Interestingly, Will, the paper that Corey and I have that we use this data set for, that's in review currently at the symposium.
Yeah.
It's a relative abundance of turkeys across the range.
Yeah.
And we used land cover and environmental things like weather related things. And
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, I remember you
all
showing
sorts
me
of-
some of those preliminary maps that y'all put together.
yeah. And then it was also, Corey, you're the guy on this, integrating several data sets so that they're leveraging the weaknesses and strengths of each other to get a better estimate of how many or the relative abundance of turkeys.
Yeah, and I'm kind of starting to mishmash all these together, so hopefully that's okay. But Will mentioned this integrating data, and I think that's exactly the objective, and I think the future of how we can think about monitoring different species, including turkey, right? So one of the things we're doing in Florida is we're actually integrating FWC data as well. So some of the state agency data that is, comes with different biases, but maybe less biases than some of the citizen science data.
Right.
And
Or
so
at least
we're
it's
trying
a different suite of biases.
exactly different suite of bias. So the whole objective is to put all these data sets together, kind of stack them on top of each other, and borrow the strengths and minimize the weaknesses to try to paint a bigger picture of relative abundance throughout space.
Yeah, so like for example, Corey, the poult per hen data from the state agency, which
Yep.
also in our state, at least, and in many other states as well, but it's certainly in our state, is driven by observations from the general public.
Right.
So we have these estimates. So every year from the standardized survey, we've talked about it a ton on this, but you're able to then integrate data like that into this one of the layers that's giving the strength of it's more like a metric of reproductive success, right?
Exactly. And so thinking about iNaturalist, you just upload a photo. There's no abundance measure, right? You just know that it's there because someone took a photo and uploaded it with those coordinates. Whereas something like FWC, you can actually get some sort of productivity measure, pulse per hen. And then eBird, you rarely get, pulse per hen, but you can get the number of individuals, right? Whether 50 turkeys in a field or whether
Yeah,
5.
like a group size.
You can get a lot of these different data, and I'm still and relatively speaking just started working on this, but I think there's a lot of potential to think about how these data go together and answer kind of big scale questions.
Mm-hmm. And Corey, you mentioned bias a couple of times, like with the eBird records. How do you deal with that? Like knowing that there's some uncertainty in some of the records as to whether or not the IDs were accurate. Is there a way to deal with that, or do you just kind of have to take it at face value and hope that the data set is so large and robust that any of that will kind of wash out?
So there's two things here. When I think of biases, I don't necessarily think about what you're asking. What you're asking is about you're asking about kind of quality of the data, right?
That's
like,
right.
Hey, if someone says they saw a turkey, did they see a turkey?
Yeah.
Luckily with turkeys, I think
Usually pretty accurate.
I think less of an issue. But when you get down to hooded warbler versus prothonotary warbler, But the answer that I usually give for this is pretty much what you said. You're not talking about tens or hundreds of records. You're talking about millions of records.
Right.
And so that the size of the data allows for some robustness.
Right.
And there are filters. So like, for instance, if you're up in boreal Canada, you can't submit a turkey, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's not on the list of species.
Right.
Because it's not supposed to be there.
Yeah.
Even here, even here in Broward County where I live, there's one spot for turkeys in the whole county. And because there's only one spot, they're actually not on the list. So if I want to submit a turkey to the data set, I actually have to do a special, it's a rare bird, right? So I have to say, I saw this turkey, here's a photo, or here's how I identified that bird. Again, for turkeys, I think less of an issue potentially, but for other birds, that same theory applies.
Yeah. Okay.
But now the other thing with biases is when I say that word, what I usually mean is, for instance, we get more records on the weekend.
Yeah.
Because that's when people aren't working, right?
Right.
Or we get more records near urban areas because that's where people live. So those
you get more records during good weather.
Exactly. Yeah. Or springtime.
You might get more entries of turkeys near Jacksonville because there's so many people that live in Jacksonville, and there are some turkeys. But you wouldn't interpret that as there being more turkeys. It's just more opportunity to see the turkey.
Yes.
Right.
And so that's when we have to account for that using statistical models to try to, you understand the effort though, right? You know that there's more people in Jacksonville. You know that there's more checklists in Jacksonville. There's more data. Mm-hmm. And so you kind of try to tease that out using different modeling approaches.
I thought one of the things that you did, Corey, when we were talking about this and you were kind of explaining some of the things going on under the hood, from what I guess the way I was understanding it, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but there's a lot of common species like turkeys that pretty much people are gonna, they're gonna know what it is, like a raccoon or a deer. Like, there are lots of species that pretty much most people in the general public know what it is, and they're also sort of like not excited about it, I guess. Like, it's, seeing a raccoon isn't so noteworthy that they go put it in the app. Whereas if they saw some kind of rare bird, they might be like if somebody sees this rare bird, they're going to go put it in the app. So there's some bias, I guess, associated with how exciting the observation is. You might end up with rare species getting much better coverage because everybody that sees the rare species is going to put it in. Aren't you kind of leveraging that sort of bias by using other species that are sort of similar stature? So in other words, like you're using how often people put raccoons in to understand something about how often they would put in a turkey if they saw it?
Not exactly, but I think I know what you're talking about.
Well, I don't know what I'm talking about, so the fact that I'm close enough is good.
No, so what you're asking about is this paper that we have under review that in the symposium, what's it called? Proceedings or whatever. They used camera trap data, right? So there's these camera trap arrays. You guys talk about camera traps a lot, I assume?
Yeah. We've talked about Snapshot USA before.
Okay, and so we're using that and integrating it with iNaturalist. But with iNaturalist, and so what we need to do is estimate something called detection probability, right? And so detection probability is like the probability of a given record or a given turkey being detected, right? Because you don't know what this is. And so in order to do that, we use, like Galliformes, and can't remember exactly what else we use, but, we use other Galliformes or I think might have been small mammals as well, because those are, by a given camera trap, those are similarly detected, right? Compared to a wild turkey and a hooded warbler, right? Those are going to be vastly different in terms of the number of times they're going to show up on a camera trap. Yeah. So yes, but those biases are human driven, but the thing that I think you're referring to is a little bit more of a statistical analysis.
Okay.
Yeah. That make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. I'm glad Will's always with me. I mean, that's great. Will's with me. I like Will. I mean, this is good.
I've had my coffee this morning, Marcus.
Will's smarter than me. That's the problem.
No, that's not true.
So I knew that, like, after kind of listening to you talk about various things that are going on, and I don't really fully understand any of them from the analytical side of it. It was pretty interesting, a lot of the problems that you have with this kind of data and the clever ways that folks like yourself are figuring out how to deal with them so that we can, gain more out of the opportunity.
But I think, and I'll just throw something back at you, I think part of the benefit to me of a collaboration like this is that, I know turkeys from a birding perspective and how to get them on my checklist for a big day. Yeah. I don't know turkeys like you guys do, and so having somebody to say, like, hey, here's what the data's showing us, does this make sense? Like, is this logical?
Yeah.
Because the problem with models is that, you have to have some sort of gut check or logic check. And so being able to send Marcus a map, and then I think he probably sends it to Will as well, and sends it to all his buddies and say, like, hey, does this make sense? That's a really, really important part of, the kind of academic collaboration.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then, having those I mean, obviously we're incapable of doing the type of modeling that you're doing. So that would make you a critical team member if we tried to undertake something like this. And then also when those models spit something out, you need a biological interpretation of that, right? So,
Yep.
okay, we found out that turkeys were associated with this particular habitat feature that we measured. Why might that be? You know?
Yep.
And that's when we start forming hypotheses that we could test using other potential techniques.
And so can I hone in on what you just said, Will?
Yeah.
Because, a lot of one point I wanted to make that I don't think we've gotten to yet with a lot of these eBird, iNaturalist, these types of data sets, these are at quite large spatial scales.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're really beneficial to answer kind of like macro scale questions, like relative abundance across the state of Florida.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah,
by no
why are
means can
turkeys
we
declining in this region and not that region?
exactly.
You have
But
to
to understand the mechanism, you have to do what Will just said. You have to go in and get on the ground and actually kind of trap turkeys and do the kind of biology stuff that you guys do that's, more localized, I think, to get at the mechanism a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, it's just a point that I think is really important to hone in on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and like the NWTF as a call for proposals, asking people to scientists to submit on different topics that they're interested in funding. And then I think this particular one was something about trying to develop a way to track or estimate at least relative abundance of turkeys range wide.
Yep.
And then they send that to me, and I'm sitting there like, I don't know what to do here. Like like that's not me.
Yeah.
But I know a guy.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of value to to that interdisciplinary work, and it's allowing us as turkey people to bring in somebody that doesn't necessarily care about turkeys like yourself, but you've got this massive skill set that's super important for us to do the kinds of things we want to do, and we can't do without having someone with your interests and skill sets. So it's a great way to integrate it. And this one was definitely an interesting unfolding of that type of collaboration.
It's been a fun collaboration so far, But now I'm thinking like, why haven't I been collaborating with Will this whole time? He gets me.
Yeah.
Marcus,
Yeah,
I think
you missed an opportunity here.
Yeah, I know. That's what I'm thinking.
Marcus, I think you just made a really important point that I kind of want to like reiterate or double down on, because it probably seems
Say
intuitive.
Will gets me, Corey.
It probably seems intuitive to a lot of our listeners that you would want to bring in people with different skill sets to help, tackle these larger, turkey conservation issues. But that has not been done a lot of time, by a lot of turkey researchers in the past. And I shouldn't call out turkey researchers. I should say, like, in all areas of research, traditionally in the past, we've done a really bad job at collaborating across disciplines and bringing in people that aren't deer experts or turkey experts or quail experts. And then I think what we're
kind
seeing,
of siloed.
Yeah, we're siloed. It's I think a tendency of human nature. But I am optimistic that scientists are getting better and better at understanding the value that has in conservation-related issues, and we're seeing more of it now.
Yeah.
Like a mic drop moment there. That was good.
Well, I didn't mean to end the episode on that. We're only 30 minutes in.
that
We have a
was-
lot
that-
more things to talk about.
That was solid,
can
man.
you
Like
do the hammer?
I feel motivated. Jeez.
We need a hammer. Will, it's like drop the hammer.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, I agree with you, Will, that we really, for the resource, I think we really stand to benefit from doing more of this kind of stuff. Because like you're the same way, Will, like NWTF wants a way to estimate relative abundance of turkeys.
I ain't putting in
What
for
you
that. Yeah.
Like I wouldn't even know where to start.
Yeah.
You know where I started? Holler at Corey.
Yeah. That's the
and
first
see what
thing.
he thinks, and he was like, "Oh yeah, we could do all this stuff." And I was like, "Okay."
Yeah.
And right now, so our work, just to talk about our work a little bit more, is like where I see it is laying the groundwork, like trying to put the data sets together, come up with the methods so that, hey, we do it from, I can't remember this exact dates in our analysis, but let's say 2020 to 2024 or whatever, right? And so we're kind of like aggregating over years But once we get that framework, and if we can get even more people out there submitting data and contributing data, then we repeat that analysis 2 years from now.
Yeah.
And
So
then
now
again,
you're
2 years after
tracking
that. So
relative
now
abundance
you're
change.
really
Yeah.
actually getting at an ability to track. I think, coming back to your point a minute ago, Marcus.
Yeah, and it's at a resolution spatially and temporally that's meaningful. Like it's not like we're just saying the population of all turkeys has gone up or down. No, you could say population in this region of Alabama has gone up or down.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're getting enough data and you're that repeated measure right over time. So Corey, how many turkey observations did you say there was?
1.87 million.
All right, so I'm expecting folks out there. This is my expectation. We're going to double that by the end of turkey season. We're trying to hit 3 mil. So you need to download this app. I don't remember. We'll link it in the show notes. Corey, we're going to have to get back with you to link it in the show notes. I'm going to do it. But we need basically everybody that you know that's out there in an opportunity to collect data on turkeys and various other bird species. I'll go ahead and plug that for you, Corey.
Yeah. I mean, I think iNaturalist would be I think it's an easy entryway.
Yeah.
Most people
we could do
iNaturalist
iNaturalist any bird.
So I think that would be good too. Yeah. But the thing that gets me excited, again, I know I mentioned this, but talking to, your listeners is, these are the guys and gals that go out places that most people don't go.
Mm-hmm.
That's what gets me from a scientist perspective. That's what gets me really excited, like getting data from places that we don't get that much data from, whether it's turkeys or not. Anything. I think it just gets me worked up.
No, I can definitely see that. I mean, I would imagine there's a strong bias of the data towards like parks and easily, publicly accessible areas. Yeah.
Which is great, and that's great data. But like, hey,
but that leaves huge holes in the map.
Yeah. Well, and you think about in the southeastern United States in particular, the majority of the land is private.
Right.
A lot of that land has access from like a person or just like a couple of people in a family together or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I can see really quickly where that gap in knowledge would persist. It would have to be on private land.
Right.
I mean, are you guys birders or no? Like, are you ever? Will, you said you use Merlin, so you're kind of a birder.
I bird when I hunt.
Okay.
And then like, occasionally like I'll be out, burning or something like that, just out for whatever reason, and then I'll hear a call or a song I don't recognize, and I'll open up the app and try to figure out what it is, kind of thing. So I'm birding curious. We'll say that.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a start. That's good.
I'm, I guess, doing it in a similar way to Will, or I'm using it when I'm hunting principally, but I also use it a lot when I'm around. Like we burned an area and I'm kind of like out there just checking it out, and then I periodically open up the app and just kind of try to hear what all is around and learn those things, and then I'm using that information to then go back to people with like, hey, if you go and do these things in your woods, you might get more turkeys, but you also might get these other really cool species that are, that aren't doing well as well.
Yeah.
Right. You inspire people that have different interests if you have a more comprehensive knowledge of how communities are responding to what you're doing.
So on that point, Marcus, I remember the first time I met you because I looked and I was like, oh man, this guy publishes a lot about game, and I'm like, oh, this guy's a game researcher. And then I had a conversation with you, and you started telling me about your approach to science is actually to use game to get community level responses with proper habitat management. Am I mischaracterizing or? No,
I think I'm very passionate about that. I really want to benefit wildlife in general, and I think game species are a funding mechanism and a leverage point in terms of interest to get widespread application of things that benefit wildlife.
Have you started down that road of like looking at other species that co-benefit from turkey management? Sorry, I'm probably not supposed to
just
ask
sort-
you questions. I just
No,
I
it's
don't know
all
if that's
good.
allowed. I don't know if that's allowed. Sorry.
I see what you're doing here, Corey, and I like it.
He's flipping the classroom on us.
No, I would say that I'm doing it more from an anecdotal standpoint,
Okay.
but I have had some formal research funded that does that somewhat as well. For example, not with turkeys, I had a deer project that was also a gopher tortoise project. The intent was to see how management for deer affected gopher tortoises.
And I think the reason I'm asking you this is it comes back to the point earlier of, for the listeners that are going to go install the app, actually getting data on more than just turkeys is really valuable to understand the flow-on effects of habitat management more generally, right? Like Bachman sparrows that are going to be singing when you're out there in the blinds, like getting that data is really important.
Yeah.
Well, and the other way that I've used it, Corey, is you can open up the Merlin app and hear a suite of birds, and then I see Bachman sparrow, and you know what I think? Poults are going to do good here.
Right. That's what I was going to say
They
too,
are
Marcus.
associated
Yeah.
with the vegetation structure that poult rearing is successful in.
Yeah.
And that they are a real-time measure of whether or not that's present and high enough quality for your birds that you care about. A lot of people don't care about the Bachman sparrow, but knowing that might give them a lot of intel on what they do care about if they're trying to make more turkeys.
Absolutely. Marcus, I kind of equate it to what we talk about on here all the time is knowing your plants, right? And being able to identify plants.
Mm-hmm.
And we drive that point home because it broadens the understanding that these landowners, hunters, land managers have of the places that they're trying to manage and they're trying to hunt. And it helps them understand, maybe why turkeys are or are not doing well in those areas. And I think it's the same thing with learning songbirds. I mean, you can learn 20 or 30 species, and if you learn the right ones, you can really see some strong habitat associations or vegetation associations there that will start to give you information on, okay, why is this bird in this area? Okay, well, it's probably later succession or mid-succession or early succession or even grassland, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then
When
I feel like the
I've
more
got
you
indigo
broaden,
bunting, and now I've got nesting cover for turkeys.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
And then once that knowledge broadens out and you become a well-rounded naturalist, I think that just vastly improves your ability to manage habitat in an area, even if it is targeted towards just turkeys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they are indicators that respond really quickly to change.
Right. Yeah. And that's what Corey, speaking to your point earlier about, whether I'm a birder or not, I mean, I think that that's really what drove me to become more interested in, just passerines in general is because they have such strong associations with particular types of vegetation. And being a habitat guy, I really appreciate that. And I see them as, a useful tool to help study, like what are the conditions in an area where I don't actually have vegetation measurements. Well, I can go in and look at, bird species occupancy and start to get some clues.
Yeah. And then just submit all that data. And then I'm happy. So cool.
if we can switch gears a little bit, Corey, I wanted to give you a chance. We've talked about some of the stuff that you're working on directly related to turkeys with Marcus, but what other kinds of associations have you used these data to look at?
Yeah, I mean, like I kind of mentioned in the beginning there, like this is a more unique foray into like single species.
Right.
Like most of what I do is looking at kind of like biodiversity as a whole, community level metrics, species richness, right? The total number of species in a given place. And so, a lot of the work that I've done academically has been trying to understand how and when, and you can use eBird and iNaturalist data to answer these questions and other citizen science platforms. One thing I've looked at is kind of sometimes you get increased levels of biodiversity in urban areas because you end up with like heterogeneous areas, right? You think about, just a large swaths of grassland, which are very important for some of the specialist species, but the level of biodiversity is relatively low. But the nearby cities have wetlands, streams, forest, grassland, like this mix of habitat that actually increases the biodiversity kind of in the cities at times. So that's some of the kind of broad picture work that I've kind of done in the past. Yeah.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah, so those areas may be a bit more biodiverse, but then area-sensitive species may not do as well there, like if they require,
Exactly.
broad expanses of uninterrupted habitat.
Yep, exactly.
Well, and in that context, also, like you were talking about being able to ground truth and, incorporate other skill sets and things, like you wouldn't necessarily interpret that as, oh, that means human development is good for biodiversity.
No.
Well, if you go look at the species diversity, it's often a whole bunch of hyper generalists, that are in that situation. Like you're going to find cardinals and mockingbirds and squirrels and raccoons, and a lot of the species aren't ones that are closely tied to specific types of vegetation. But then you have so much variation, you also do pick up some of those in various different kinds since it's so heterogeneous.
Yeah, I think my interpretation is more like people automatically assume urban areas are horrible for biodiversity, but we need to think about the biodiversity that's in urban areas as well and manage it across the whole spectrum of habitat types.
It's definitely an important thing to understand and be cognizant of and be trying to take deliberate action for, because we're not going to get less urban.
Exactly.
But,
and then, to your question, the other thing I do, I guess, research-wise, is I'm increasingly interested in why people submit observations to these citizen science platforms like iNaturalist and eBird. Like, what are the motivations?
Yeah.
And because I think understanding that can help fill some of those gaps that I mentioned, right? Like, maybe it's a little bit selfish at times, but I want to fill all those gaps on a map so I can have better pictures of biodiversity. And I think in order to do that, you kind of have to understand some of the motivations and how those manifest into the biases.
Yeah. I'm curious, Corey, on that note, is there a way that people can kind of tell you that in the app? Like, do they have a, hey, why are you using this kind of thing or something? Or is that something you're doing separate?
It's definitely separate. But I think that comes back to this, like, eBird versus iNaturalist, like the differences between the two. Like, iNaturalist is many more users because it's all you have to do is upload a photo, right? Whereas eBird, you kind of create a list of species, and so you have to know a little bit more of the birds, to kind of create that list. So there's like this difference, and that difference seems not that much, but from a data analysis perspective, it's really big because you can get these absences that we talked about earlier.
Yeah. That's interesting. I will say eBird seems less appealing to me because of the word list. My spouse is a list person, and I'm not a list person.
Imagine that.
That seems like work to me. Like, oh, I got to keep up with this list of stuff. No.
Oh boy.
There's no hope for him, Corey.
No comment.
I can see Corey's skin crawling.
Does your spouse listen to all these podcasts you produce?
No.
No. Okay. I'm definitely gonna send this to my spouse because this is a big thing for me. She actually listens to podcasts. So.
Oh, does she listen to this podcast?
I don't know. She gets them on the internet or something. I think I don't know wherever you get podcasts.
That is where they live.
I don't know.
By the way, everybody,
this is on the internet.
Corey has never listened to a podcast.
Yeah,
I mean, I just
you have been on a few as a guest, but
I don't
you've
have
never
an app.
listened to a podcast.
I still listen to the radio. Like, this is what most people listen to still, right? It's like, I don't know.
I've got news for you.
Podcasts
maybe not. Like when I'm driving up the state, I'm just seek, find a next
after
radio
today's
station.
experience, I don't think that we've increased his motivation to listen to any podcast.
No, I didn't know they were so friendly. This is good.
Yeah. Well, Corey, my experience, I think it was in 2017, Bronson Strickland at the Mississippi State University, he launched Deer University, the first podcast that kind of was the spear that led this thing into this podcast network that this podcast ultimately is now in. And the thing that I host in the lab, he launched that in 2017 and asked me to be a guest on it. And I think it was like episode 4. So it was just right out of the gate, And I was like, what is a podcast? I've never heard of that. Like, what is that? Do people actually listen to that thing? Like, what are you talking about? It was the same thing. Had no idea. So that was my first experience, was actually on the Deer University podcast. I had never heard of one. I didn't know what it was. None of that. And here we are.
So is this on
So
YouTube?
this is your gateway.
Maybe this, like, where do you put this?
What do you mean?
So the main
Sorry.
the main source for podcast is going to be Apple Podcast. So Apple has their own native app where you can.
Yeah, and there's several other ones
subscribe.
that are competing. This one goes out on all of them, but that's our majority of our downloads come there probably.
Spotify hosts podcast, and then there's all sorts of web-based servers that host podcasts too.
Yeah, and actually, YouTube has moved toward housing podcasts, and they do that, and we've kind of started moving toward directing listeners there, because we can incorporate things into the video part. Where people, like if we're talking about a graph, we cut the graph in so people can visually see what we're talking about. So that seems to be gaining steam even for this podcast. But yeah, so we're putting it in all sorts of places.
Sorry, I didn't mean to make it a Teach Me About Podcasts episode. So I
No,
apologize.
you're good. And what's funny about that is my experience is a little bit different than y'all's, where I was actually a pretty avid podcast listener when Marcus approached me about coming on to be co-host on this podcast. And I was like, knowing what I knew about podcasts, I was like, you don't want me as a co-host.
It took some convincing.
But here we are.
Yeah, and I was trying to make the point earlier, Corey, like I started where you're at, and look at me now. Like now I'm hosting multiple podcasts and a podcast network, and all this funding is centered around it and all this. So that's where you're headed, man.
I just gotta go back. I just gotta go back to my models.
Well, that's the thing too. Is we were talking about interdisciplinary collaboration earlier, and this has been a great medium for that, because I feel like it forces us every week to talk to somebody different. I mean, we have some episodes where it's just us, but we talk to such a diversity of guests that it's constantly like prompting our creativity, giving us new ideas, and thinking of fields of science to incorporate into our work that we never have before. So it's kind of an opportunity, or it's like really more like almost forced growth, because we got to talk to people to keep the show running. And as a nice
we're trying to be
byproduct
creative. We don't want to just say the same thing over and over again.
Right.
So it's like, let's bring in the scientist that studies chestnuts, or this guy over here, uses data from iNaturalists to do stuff. We
this
probably
person
have turkeys
does
in there.
This person does conservation governance work.
We've got like a wide spectrum, and I have personally enjoyed that quite a bit about it, and definitely have grown personally and as a scientist from that. So I agree, Will, that this has been an important outcome of this, even for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it gets a lot of our listeners, thinking outside the box that they typically do. So, well, what did we not ask you about that you expected us to? Or what would you like to share that you haven't yet?
Oh, jeez. Is that how you end every...
Both of our families are listening right now, so you're talking to like 8 people.
Including, and your spouse is listening. So.
Yeah, I don't know. I think you asked me everything,
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have much to share,
So, where are the most turkeys in Florida?
I need
We've
section,
got a bunch of people
township,
out there
range,
thinking, I
or
cannot wait
lat
to see that map.
Yeah, the map is coming, and it will be a soft release in 2 weeks at the symposium.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I say soft release because it's it's unpublished results right now, and I know you guys talk about
at the convention.
the value of peer review. So that's why I'm reluctant to say too much until it's goes through that obviously really important process.
Yeah, hopefully one of the papers will be the one with the relative abundance range wide. That one will hopefully make it through peer review and be out relatively soon, because it's already in peer review. I saw that you sent me the other paper like this morning. from the Florida corridor.
Yep.
The Floridor effort.
That reminds me of something I wanted to bring up earlier, Marcus. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'm going to lose it. But it's an important point, I think, to make to our listeners is that outside of that relative abundance map that y'all are putting together, really the only other data that we have at that scale to speak to turkey abundance is harvest rates, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that's a huge, add-on to the data that we have on turkeys.
Huge change in the way we're thinking about doing it. I mean, it was for me transformed the way that I thought about how we could collect data to get a robust estimate range wide and be able to track it over time. And like, this is definitely a game changer from my perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have believed it was possible to essentially y'all crowdsourced it, right? It's kind of what you did. And I'm glad that we have people like Corey that know how to do that, because if it were left up to me and you, Marcus, we never would have figured it out.
Nah. Like, yeah, let's just let's count how many get killed. Isn't that what we already do? Yeah.
That seems good.
We can do better.
Yeah.
We just have to holler at Corey.
Well, in some places we don't even have the effort to associate with that harvest rate too, right? So if harvest goes down, but hunter numbers were cut in half and we don't know that, then, the inferences that you make from that are probably incorrect.
Yeah. No, it's good stuff. Corey, we really appreciate you taking time to do this. I know it probably was painstaking for you. Especially to talk turkey this long with us.
Talk so long to you, yeah.
You can add podcaster to your CV now, though.
Yeah, I'll definitely be putting it in there. Yeah. No, I appreciate the opportunity, and I look forward to seeing some submissions from places on the map that I don't usually see them. So
good.
Yeah, we're trying to double the observations. So I was hoping that they could actually put why they're doing it, and they could write in Wild Turkey Science episode. Yeah. Whatever this one is, 120.
That would be fun. Yeah. In the comment, is there a comment box on there that they can add that? Just put WTS.
People will be like, what is WTS? Yeah. Well, thanks everybody out there for listening. Hope y'all enjoyed this. We're trying to bring in as many different kinds of viewpoints and skill sets and everything into this as we can. So thanks, Corey, for helping us out with that. I'm excited about the work that we've been doing together, and excited about the opportunity for the kind of work that you're doing, how that might influence conservation of this species. And I guess if y'all are listening out there, we've got the apps linked in the show notes. There's no excuse. There's no reason we can't double the observations this year.
All right. Thanks, Corey. Nice to meet you. Enjoyed having you on.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Wild Turkey Science is part of the Natural Resources University podcast network and is made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow, a grassroots organization dedicated to the wild turkey. To learn more about TFT, check out turkeysfortomorrow.org.